And I'd like to ask the guests and visitors and members please to rise. Members, a quorum is present. A quorum is present. I'd like to ask our members to please return to their desks. And I'd like to ask the guests and visitors and members please to rise. Everyone in the gallery, please rise for this morning's prayer from Rabbi Denise Egger of Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood. She will offer this morning's prayer. Rabbi?
Let us pray. Holy One, we call you by many names. This morning we ask your abundant blessings upon our great state and all of its inhabitants. This golden state is filled with your glory, from our stirring mountain vistas to our ocean panoramas and to our velvet desert landscapes. Bless our land in these difficult economic times, when our California residents struggle to maintain our way of life, to care for their children and families, to find access to health care, jobs, and meaningful work. So bless these, our legislators, who work for hours on end to find solutions to our state's woes, and help them work together in the spirit of cooperation across the partisan divide. Help them to see that their actions or inactions create success or suffering in our state, and help them to serve with compassion and with fairness. This month we mark gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities' Pride Month. 40 years ago, on the streets of New York City, the harassment of this community reached a peak. The gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community no longer would take the victimization foisted upon them by the police, and fought back when a community gathering place was raided. And for the next 3 days, they became known as the Stonewall Riots. And so each June, the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community marks this historic turn of events and the assertion of our humanity and dignity with Pride celebrations. As Pride Month is observed worldwide, and in our state, from the northernmost parts of Humboldt County to San Francisco and Monterey, Fresno and here in Sacramento, Los Angeles and Long Beach, Palm Springs and San Diego, and also through communities like the Inland Empire and Orange County, Bakersfield and Santa Barbara, Modesto and San Jose, Santa Cruz, Pasadena, Chico, San Luis Obispo, Torrance and Studio City, each mark Gay Pride celebrations. So on this rainbow morning, We too mark and celebrate the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities' Pride Month in our capital. And we know, Holy One of Blessing, that you shall shower us with love and with understanding, and bring your healing into our midst, for this community has been reeling from the blows and trauma foisted upon it with the passage and upholding of Proposition 8 and the diminution of civil rights. Never before in our history has the Constitution been amended to take away a group's civil right. And so the GLBT community, through its celebration of Pride Month and through the recognition of it here in this great assembly, we pray will never turn back in pursuit of equality and liberty. We pray you will be with us in restoring the full dignity and civil and human rights to the gay and lesbian community. This Pride Month of celebration across our state provides all of California, Holy One, the opportunity to assert the human worth and dignity of gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people, each one made in your image, in God's image, B'Tselem Elohim. And so we pray, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani v'shasanu B'Tselem Elohim. Praised are you, eternal Holy One, source of the universe, who has created me, but who has created all of us in the divine image. Ken Yehi Ratzon, so may it be God's will.
Thank you, Rabbi. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Today's pledge will be led by Assemblymember Bill Monning. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. We go on now to the reading of this previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Thursday, June 18, 2009. Assemblyman at 9:30 a.m. Honorable Lori Saldana.
Mr. Todico moves. Mr. Gaines seconds. Reading of the previous day's journal will be dispensed with. Presentations and petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read. Their reports deemed adopted. There are no messages from the governor nor messages from the Senate. We move on now to motions and resolutions. For today's absences on legislative business, Assemblyman Smythe is out. On personal business, Assemblymember Buchanan is away. We'll continue with motions and resolutions. Mr. Todico.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I request unanimous consent for Assembly members Amayano, Adams, John Perez, and Victor Manuel Perez to have guests and photographers on the floor and at the rostrum today.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to allow Assembly members Blumenfield, Conway, and Logue to personally adjourn in memory of individuals today.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to re-refer AC 813 by Dr. Hernandez from the Judiciary Committee to the Higher Education Committee and then back to the Judiciary Committee.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to re-refer SB 407 by Senator Padilla from the Housing and Community Development Committee to the Judiciary Committee and then back to Housing.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to re-refer SB 459 by Ms. Swope from the National Resource Committee to the Judiciary Committee and then back to Natural Resources.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to re-refer SB 815 by Senator Cogdell from the Higher Ed Committee to the Veterans Committee and then back to Higher Education.
Without objection. Mr. Torrico.
Madam Speaker, I apologize. On previous motion, request unanimous consent to refer for ACA 23, not 13, ACA 23 by Dr. Hernandez, from Judiciary Committee to the Higher Education Committee and then back to Judiciary. Thank you.
Without objection. And SB 772? Thank you. Mr. Torrico.
Madam Speaker, if I can return to motion resolutions momentarily.
Without objection.
I hereby request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 118 to allow guests in the rear of the chamber during the ceremony and recognition of Omega Psi Phi fraternity.
Without objection. Members, I'd like to direct your attention to the rear of chambers. We have some special guests with us this morning. Assemblymember Hall would like to introduce them. If you could please direct your attention to the rear of chambers. Mr. Hall will be speaking from the Speaker's desk. Mr. Hall.
Members, Madam Speaker and members, it serves me an honor and a privilege to be able to recognize members of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, where I happen to be also a distinguished member. Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated was founded on Friday, November 17th, 1911 in the office of Ernest E. Just, Professor of Biology, Howard University. The founders were Professor Just, faculty advisor, and 3 undergraduate students, Edgar A. Love, Oscar J. Cooper, and Frank Coleman. Each of the founders has distinguished careers in their chosen fields. Edgar A. Love, a bishop of the United Methodist Church. Oscar J. Cooper, a prominent physician who practiced in Philadelphia for over 50 years. Frank Coleman, chairman of the Department of Physics at Howard University. And Dr. Ernest E. Just, a world-renowned biologist. Today, Omega Psi Phi has a membership of over 150,000 men, including 24 college presidents, entertainers Bill Cosby, Steve Harvey, Tom Joyner, politicians Congressman James Clyburn, Jesse Jackson Sr., Jesse Jackson Jr., Georgia Attorney General Thurbert Baker, business leaders Earl Graves, CEO of Black Enterprise Magazine, Byron Lewis, CEO Uniworld Group, Thomas Dortch, National President of the 100 Black Men, athletes such as Michael Jordan, Shaquille O'Neal, just to name a few. Currently, there are over 25 chapters of Omega Psi Phi in California. These chapters are located as far north as Sacramento, Oakland, as far south as Riverside. Los Angeles, California has the most chapters located in one area within 8. Each chapter is charged with implementing community service programs in their local area. These programs are designed to uplift the community and help those less fortunate than ourselves. Today we have over 120 members of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and they are here at the Capitol in an effort to try to bring awareness to the importance of outreach in the area of the reduction of crime, health care, economic development, and job opportunities. And I'm honored today to have Cedric Spencer, the 12th District Representative for Omega Psi Phi, which are the states on the West Coast, James Walkey, the North California rep, Willie Washington, the Political Action Chair, and also Brother Ricky Lewis here with us today. The brothers are standing above us. Brothers, please stand, of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And again, in the rear of the chamber here, we're taking a picture with Cedric Spencer, James Walkey, Willie Washington, and Ricky Lewis. Thank you, members. On behalf of the California State Assembly, the 80 members, we'd like to present this resolution to the greatest fraternity this side of heaven, the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
Members, we have other special guests with us today. On behalf of Assembly Member Manuel Perez, he welcomes his wife Gladys and his children Ruben and Alejandro. They're in the rear of chambers. Welcome to Sacramento, Perez family. Members, we will continue with our floor session. We're moving now to a special ceremony in observance of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Pride Month, beginning with a presentation of H.R. 17 by Assemblymember John Perez. Members, if we could please have everyone's attention, and I ask everyone to return to their seats so we can take up file item 15, H.R. 17. Clerk will read.
House Resolution 17 by Assemblymember John A. Perez and others relative to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Pride Month.
Mr. Perez, you may open.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise to present House Resolution 17, which declares June as Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Pride Month. This year, we commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, which represent the turning point when the LGBT movement entered mainstream society. This is a poignant moment for the LGBT community, both in California and nationally. While this ceremony takes place against the backdrop of many debates on the local level, it is about expressing the pride that we as a community feel about ourselves and that our state feels about our accomplishments. In the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, officers from the New York Police Department Public Morals Division suited up for what they thought would be a routine raid on the Stonewall Inn, which was a local gay bar. These raids were conducted in a climate of official persecution. For years, gay men and lesbians were at risk for arrest for breaking laws that prohibited same-sex couples from dancing together, and for men and women dressing in opposite gender clothing. These laws essentially criminalized their behavior. The aim of these raids was never as much about law enforcement as it was about intimidation, humiliation, and officially sanctioned discrimination. The officers who raided the Stonewall Inn that night had every expectation that, as usual, the men and women that they would detain would act like the patrons of every other bar they had raided, terrified, ashamed, and cooperative. The patrons of the Stonewall Inn had something else in mind. One woman fought back as hard as she could for 10 minutes or so as the police struggled to put her in their wagon, and as the crowd grew around her, she yelled out, "Come on, guys, do something." That simple rallying cry sparked for 4 nights the clashes between gay men and lesbians and others who weren't gay or lesbian but nevertheless felt that the marginalization was wrong. Prior to the riots, there were a few LGBT rights groups, organizations like the Mattachine Society. Those organizations laid the groundwork for the eventual gains, but were reflective of the times in which they existed. They had ambiguous names to prevent too blatant an association with a community, and they stressed conforming with the straight community rather than demanding acceptance and recognition of the LGBT community. The riots were significant and they represented a transformative moment. For the first time, gay men and lesbians had actively and aggressively fought back against the naked power employed against them. They stood up against discrimination. They refused to cooperate with the government's persecution of them. After the Stonewall, there would be no going back. The LGBT community was galvanized. The rawest acts of civil disobedience inspired a generation of civic engagement and activism. Today, it's hard to imagine how the ensuing years would have unfolded had the riots not taken place. The spirit of Stonewall can be found in every triumph and tragedy in the coming decades. Defiance in the streets and a defiant campaign to elect Elaine Noble and Harvey Milk, which rejected a pre-riot strategy of electing only straight allies. The riots awakened a sense of justice in millions of straight Americans as well, and led Californians to reject the hateful Briggs Initiative. That sense of justice could be found just as easily in California's early compassionate response to the AIDS crisis. Even now, as LGBT individuals struggle to serve in the armed forces, we draw strength from that night 40 years ago. The spirit of Stonewall lives in the men and women we honor today. Today is not about politics. Today is about recognizing the contributions of several stellar individuals who have made our state and our nation a better place. We are paying homage to the LGBT community, so indelibly tied to California. Speaker and members, I respectfully ask for your aye vote in proclaiming June 2009 as LGBT Pride Month.
Would you like to open the first roll for co-authors?
Yes, but I believe Mr. Amiano.
Mr. Amiano. Mr. Gaines.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I must regrettably rise in opposition both to this resolution and the ceremony which will accompany it. We stand today in the People's House, all the people, not just a few. It is appropriate that the Assembly recognize and appreciate the myriad diversity that comprises the California mosaic. And I congratulate those who are working selflessly to help those in need and those who are suffering. But it is sadly evident that this resolution and the ceremony today is less about that and much more about advocating changes in the law that run counter to the will of the people. And I cannot be a party to that. I believe that H.R. 17 is an outright rejection not only of respectful recognition of a plurality of viewpoints, but also the decided judgment of our initiative and judicial processes. It is essential that legislators in the People's House respect the views of the majority and of the voters of this state and our institutions, and pushing resolutions like this one to show millions of Californians that the majority party in this legislature thinks their views don't matter. It says that their deeply held beliefs and the judgment of the courts are somehow not legitimate. This is a divisive statement at a time when we should be all coming together as a state. I also rise to question the appropriateness of spending significant time debating this resolution today. Pushing resolutions like this one today shows Californians how out of touch the legislature really is with the current and urgent priorities of our state. At a time of unprecedented budget crisis for our state, the people would be far better served by the Assembly focusing its time on producing a balanced state budget, not conducting a 2-hour ceremony that only divides us at a time when we must work together.
Mr. Gaines, I need to remind you that we are taking up the matters you're referring to. If I could please ask the director
If I could continue to speak to the resolution.
Well, but you aren't addressing the resolution. I'd like to ask all members who speak today to please be respectful of the floor ceremony and direct your comments to the resolution before us at this moment.
Thank you. In closing, members, I ask each of you to look upward to the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, which dominates and inspires this chamber, and to remember his words, with malice toward none, with clarity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in. I hope all of us gathered here today act and speak with malice toward none and with charity and respect for all points of view, particularly as we speak with conviction in what we believe to be what is right and true and correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Mr. Amiano.
Thank you, members, and I do stand in support of Mr. Perez's resolution. I really didn't see any mention of marriage. I understand why a connection would be made, but we are really here today to acknowledge the people, men and women, whose shoulders many of us stand on, including past and present members of the LGBT community, Ms. Migden, Ms. Kuehl, Ms. Goldberg, Mr. Laird, of course, Senator Leno, and Senator Kehoe. Yesterday, I celebrated Father's Day, and I was thinking about my own father. Very, very hardworking guy, didn't make a lot of money. Life could be tough. I know everyone in this room has experienced something like that in one way or another. I remember growing up in the 40s and 50s, and the one afternoon he had off, he would listen to double headers, the Yankees, the beloved Yankees, with all the good Italian Americans on the team, DiMaggio and Berra and Phil Rizzuto. And I got to hang out with him in those hours, because if you know, a doubleheader lasted a long time. Was Mel Allen, I think, was the sportscaster, and it was a very good time for me and the old man to just hang out with each other. And I thought about him. He's gone now, and the world is a bit different. The values are the same, but they come up to challenges many times. They come up to self-doubts, and eventually they come up to some kind of consensus. It's been a long journey for all of us in this chamber, no matter who we are. Many times things are reduced to its most craven, and we forget the elements that bind us together, and that is respect, and that is love. And I say, in the memory of my dad, I heartily ask you to co-sponsor this and respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amiano. So on the close, you're asking for the first roll to be opened for co-authors. Mr. Gaines, you've been recognized on this matter. It's usually the custom of the House to recognize a member at one time. Could you please consult with Mr. Torrico? We'll be doing a roll call vote on co-authors.
And then on the resolution.
And on the resolution in chief? That's your request? Okay, we're almost at that point. The first roll will be open for co-authors. Clerk, please open the roll. This is for co-authors, members. This is for co-authors. First roll is for co-authors. Clerk, please close the roll. There are 43 co-authors. Second roll is on the resolution in chief. Clerk, please open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 45, noes 6. The resolution is adopted. Members, we'll now move on to the Assembly observance of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Pride Month. I recognize Assemblymember Perez. Mr. Perez, you may open.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, we just took up House Resolution 17, and I spoke about the spirit of Stonewall and what that legacy means to the LGBT community today. We recognize Pride to celebrate our community's accomplishments and the contributions of the people of California. The people we honor today personify that spirit in their work and in their many long years of service. In their own ways, each of them has served as a source of inspiration every bit as significant as Stonewall. Each of these men and women have proven by example they set that we should be proud and not ashamed, hopeful and not humiliated, and live our lives with dignity and not in fear. They have been leaders in the faith community and the armed forces. They have been agents for social change and advocates for the most vulnerable members of our society. They have, in every way, led lives of courage, honor, and service. They embody the progress we have made and the promise of the future. On behalf of Speaker Bass, Senate President Pro Tem Steinberg, the Legislative LGBT Caucus, Senator Leno, Senator Kehoe, Assemblymember Amiano, and myself, and on behalf of the members of Merit High, please join us in honoring these distinguished Californians.
Very well. I'd like to call again Mr. Perez, Mr. Amiano, Senator Kehoe, Senator Leonard, and the Speaker Bass to the center of the aisle. I will also ask the LGBT Legislative Caucus members to move to the center aisle to receive the honorees. I'll also be appointing a escort committee. I'm appointing a special committee on escort to bring our special guests into the floor for a presentation. Members, please retire to the rear of the chambers at the appropriate time to escort your honoree. I'd like to call Mr. Jim Bell, Member Brownlee, Member Evans, Member Fuentes, Member Fuhr, Member Liu, Mrs. Lowenthal, Fiona Ma, Member Mendoza, Member Nava, Member Portantino, Member Torres, Member Saldana, Member Skinner, Member Swanson, Member Imada. I'd like to call on Mr. Tirico to read the bio of Ivy Bottini. Our first recipient, Ms. Ivy Bottini.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, please. Ivy Bottini is being honored for her immense creativity and talent, her early and extensive pioneering work with the feminist and LGBT rights movement, and for being a strong and inspirational civic leader. Ivy is a graphic artist, actor, comedian, director, and mother. She helped found the first chapter of the National Organization for Women in 1966 and designed their national logo in 1969. Ivy's extensive background includes establishing the AIDS Network, the FIRDS AIDS Organization Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Lesbian Gay Police Advisory Board. She was also the first open lesbian to serve on the California Commission on Aging. Ivy served as co-chair of the Lesbian and Gay Advisory Board of West Hollywood and is also a member emeritus of the Christopher Street West Board of Directors, the longest-running gay pride celebration in the world. Ivy was an early leader addressing issues like affordable housing for LGBT seniors, substance abuse, safe sex, and partner abuse. Members, please join me in welcoming and honoring Ivy Bottini.
Members, Mr. Rodney Scott, on behalf of Ms. Ivy, will be receiving this certificate, and we'll call on Mr. Bloomingfield for special remarks. Ready? Yeah. We'll now recognize Mr. Colto to read the bio of Mr. Jose Sadia. Mr. Sadia will be escorted by members Brownlee and Swanson. Mr. Colto.
Members, Mr. Jose Sadia is being honored for the integral role he played in the shaping of the modern LGBT rights movement and for consistently being an inspiration for LGBT people who live their lives openly and with pride. Known for his years of performing at the historic Black Cat Bar in the 1950s and 1960s, Mr. Sadia entertained patrons with satirical versions of popular songs. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Mr. Sadia joined the Army and was in active service until he was discharged in 1945. He subsequently founded several LGBT organizations, at a time when very, very few existed. In 1961, members, Mr. Saria made history when he became the very first openly gay candidate for public office in United States history when he ran for the San Francisco County Board of Supervisors. His lasting contributions have been instrumental in shaping the modern LGBT rights movement. Please, a big round of applause for Jose Saria.
Our next recipient of an LGBT Caucus Award is Megan Hogan. She'll be escorted by Assembly Members Bell and Lowenthal. Mr. Hill, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Hogan is being honored for her courageous leadership in the face of adversity and for her efforts to promote tolerance and mutual respect for all people. Ms. Hogan is a recent graduate of Winston School in Del Mar, California, where she was co-president of the student body, a teacher of American Sign Language, and president of the Diversity Club Gay Straight Alliance. Megan plans to attend California State University Northridge in the fall of 2009. She recently won an essay contest for which she was honored at the inaugural Harvey Milk Diversity Celebration in San Diego last month. Megan plans to continue working to ensure that all people, regardless of their differences, are treated with respect, dignity, and fairness. Megan hopes to become an advocate for the hearing impaired in LGBT communities.
Our next recipient of an LGBT Caucus Award is Bienestar. Accepting the award on behalf of the organization is the founder and president, Mr. Oscar De La O. He will be escorted by Assembly Members Fuentes and Ma. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and members. Bienestar Human Services is being honored for its pioneering efforts to provide crucial and life-saving services to neglected populations. Founded in 1989, Bienestar is the largest grassroots nonprofit community services organization dedicated to providing services to the Latino community. Prior to 1989, no organization existed to address the HIV/AIDS crises in the Latino community. Since its founding, Bienestar has been on the front line of addressing HIV and AIDS, coming out, being transgendered, as well as offering substance abuse counseling and anti-abuse programs.
Our fifth recipient of an LGBT Caucus Award is General Keith Kerr, who will be escorted by Assembly Members Liu and Saldana. Ms. Salas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. General Kerr is being honored for his lifetime of service to the United States Army and the California Military Reserve, and for his commitment to fighting for equal rights for LGBT service members. General Kerr enlisted in the Army in 1953 and served in the 513th Military Intelligence Group in Germany. After leaving Army service, he served in the U.S. Army Reserve. Later, he received a commission in the California State Military Reserve and has risen to the rank of Brigadier General at the time of his retirement. In 2003, General Kerr became one of the highest-ranking officers ever to come out. Since that time, he has been a leader in advocating for the rights of the LGBT service members.
Our next recipient of an LGBT Caucus Award is Father Jeffrey Farrell. He'll be escorted by Assembly Members Evans and Nava. Mr. Chesbro, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Father Farrell is being honored for his conviction and lifelong devotion to religious service and for his continued efforts to be an instrument of healing and inspiration for others. Father Farrell was born in Cuba in 1957 and moved to the United States with his family in August of 1961. He was ordained a Catholic priest on June 1, 1958. After being ordained, Father Farrell served in many California communities and as a chaplain of the Air Force. In 2008, Father Farrell was removed as pastor of his church when he refused an order from his bishop to instruct his parishioners to vote in favor of Proposition 8. Since then, he has spoken extensively about his experiences standing up against discrimination.
Escorted by Mr. Nava and Ms. Gavietto. Our next recipient of an LGBT Caucus Award is Ms. Major. She'll be escorted by Assembly Members Portantino and Imada. Mr. De Leon, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Major is being honored for her work with the transgender community, for her work to combat HIV and AIDS, and for mentoring many of today's transgender leaders to stand tall and to defend their human rights. Ms. Major is a transgender male to female woman who's been active in the transgender community for over 35 years. She has worked at many community-based organizations and public health agencies, including the ARC, a Refuge, the Tenderloin AIDS Resource Center, the Santa Clara Department of Public Health AIDS Program, and the Sanyo AIDS Foundation. She's currently the Community Organizing Director for the Transgender, Gender Variant and Intersex Justice Project, and for her lifetime of activism, she recently received the Social Justice Sabbatical Award for the Vanguard Public Foundation. Let's give her a very warm welcome. Welcome, Ms. Major.
Our next recipient of an LGBT Caucus Award is Helen Zia. She'll be escorted by Assembly Members Torres and Mendoza. Mr. Monning, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Helen Zia is being honored for shedding light on the many issues that challenge the Asian American and LGBT communities, and for her long and continued involvement in Asian American and LGBT causes and family violence prevention. Her career began in 1982 after Vincent Chin, a Chinese American, was killed in a racially motivated bar fight. Helen was a leading voice in organizing the community to protest this killing. Subsequently, she's been a leader in campaigns against hate crimes and an advocate against homophobia and anti-Asian discrimination. She became a full-time journalist in 1983 and has worked for several magazines throughout her career. She remains committed to working on the many issues facing the Asian American and LGBT communities. Please welcome Helen Zia.
Members and guests, our guest speaker today is also one of our LGBT award honorees, Helen Zia. Mr. Monning has told us a little about her. There is, of course, more. Her life's work has included attending medical school, working as a construction laborer, an auto worker, a community organizer, and finally, to the field for which she is best known as a journalist and writer. In addition to the documentary Who Killed Vincent Chin, she is also author of Asian American Dreams, The Emergence of an American People. For this work, she was a finalist for the prestigious Kurama Pacific Rim Book Prize, and she was quoted by President Clinton twice while giving her own remarks. She's a former executive editor of Ms. Magazine. The City University of New York bestowed an honorary Doctorate of Law degree for her work in bringing matters of law and civil rights into public view. After careful reflection and a visit to China, Ms. Zia participated in the Summer Olympics torch relay because China hosted the Special Olympics for the first time. Members, guests, please welcome Dr. Helen Zia.
Honorable Madam Speaker and members of the Assembly, I am deeply honored for this opportunity to address the Assembly today on behalf of this lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender pride ceremony and the distinguished honorees. I extend my heartfelt thanks to Assembly members Tom Amiano and John Perez for this great privilege and especially for reintroducing this important recognition ceremony. As the daughter of immigrants from China who could barely scrape together a living to support their 6 American-born children, never did I imagine that one day I would be addressing this august body. Standing here, I have to make a confession. I must out myself as someone who was not only born and raised in New Jersey, I'm also one of the very few who will admit that I'm fond of the Garden State. I heard some applause there. Like so many Californians who originate from elsewhere, it was not until I came to the Golden State that I began to grasp the true beauty and bounty of nature as well as its diversity. I moved to California 17 years ago to be with my wife, Leah Shigemura, and I am still awestruck each day by the stunning landscape of my adopted home state, even when I'm simply going to the grocery store or coming here today. I never felt that way about the New Jersey Turnpike. California's natural diversity is exceeded in grandeur only by the brilliant diversity of its people, who are the basis for California's greatness. Indeed, that's why the struggle for fairness and high-minded principles like equality have been so ever present here, when so many groups have faced their own struggles for survival and acceptance. From the first indigenous Californians and the subsequent waves of migrants who came west across the Rockies or traveled north from America Latina or sailed east across the Pacific as the Asian Americans of my own ancestry did. And as I look around this room at all of you, the leaders and lawmakers of California, I see the proud reflection of those stories, the dreams and aspirations of all those communities. In you, I see the diverse peoples who have paved the way for all of us to be here. I'm here today with these very distinguished honorees because we too are part of the rich diversity that makes California great. As LGBTs, we have stories, hopes, and aspirations too of fairness and high-minded principles like equality, just like you and every other proud Californian. And I can assure you that LGBT people like us are part of every community that you represent in this Golden State. We are in every small town and hometown of every race, ethnicity, tribe, color, religion, in every zip code, every voting district, and the People's House here. To some of you, this may be obvious, but as a Chinese-American lesbian, an LGBT person of color, I can't tell you how many people are surprised, even shocked, that people like us exist. No LGBTs in my community. Gay people, that's a white thing. Back in the 1980s, as the AIDS pandemic took its tragic toll, the government of Japan tried to stop HIV at the border because they believed that there were no gays in the entire country of Japan. In 1995, when I was reporting on the International Women's Conference in Beijing, one of the leading UN representatives of Africa declared that there are no LGBT people in the entire continent of Africa. One can only imagine the misinformed policies that emerge when political leaders don't even recognize their own family and community members as LGBT. I recognize this kind of denial from my own life, from the days when I was a young community organizer, like our president and like many of you. I was organizing to get jobs for minority and women workers into the exclusive construction trades, and I was organizing in my own neighborhood, which was mostly Asian and African American. One day I was called to a special meeting. When I got there, my fellow community organizers were sitting in a semicircle, and I was invited to sit in the middle. Soon it became apparent that I was on trial of sorts. Floyd, the leader of the Asian American community group, began with, Helen, we've noticed that you seem to have a lot of lesbian friends. You know, there is no homosexuality in our communities. Then Tariq, who was the leader of the black group, chimed in. Homosexuality is a symptom of white, middle-class decadence. It would harm our organizing efforts in the African American community to have an organizer who is gay. Together they chimed in and said, so tell us, Helen, are you a lesbian? At the time, I was young and what we now call questioning, but it was clear that if I said yes, my life as an organizer in my own beloved community would be finished. Helen, are you a lesbian? I hesitated and I answered, no, I'm not. And with that, I stepped into the closet and slammed the door shut. But you can't hide from yourself forever, and I eventually came out as a lesbian. And by the way, both Floyd and Tariq are community leaders in Northern California, and they now both reject the homophobia that they once advocated. Some of you might think that this kind of thing couldn't possibly happen today. Unfortunately, the misinformation and sheer ignorance of our LGBT communities is still alive and well with people who know nothing about our very existence, even in California today. Last year, when Leah and I were distributing Chinese language flyers to support marriage equality, we encountered time and time again people who said, if gay people get married, there will be no more human race, no more people. I must say that I am still puzzled by this strange logic. So that means my marriage to Leah will cause all the straight people to stop having sex. They'll stop having children. I never imagined that my marriage to my spouse could have so much power to make heterosexuals stop procreating, or that our relationship could lead to the end of the human race. We are simply two people trying to make a life together as family. What could be more universally human than that? When I left my job as the executive editor of Ms. Magazine 17 years ago to come to California to be with Leah, who, by the way, is right here on this chamber floor, it was because we knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. One of the first things we did was to file for domestic partnership in San Francisco because it was one of the few places in California and indeed the entire United States at the time where it was even possible to be registered as domestic partners. Since that time, thanks to the California State Assembly, Leah and I filed for a state domestic partnership when it became available. We got married during the President's Day weekend of 2004, and then again last year on June 17th. And because of all the legal entanglements, last week we weren't sure whether we were celebrating our first anniversary, our 5th anniversary, or our 17th anniversary. And to tell you the truth, it is hard to celebrate when so many can't. It's like celebrating that we are almost equal. And even on our anniversary date, I have to say we do not reach for each other in public the way straight couples do so without even thinking, holding hands, or with gestures of affection, because we are also very aware of the alarming rise in hate crimes against people like us because of perceived sexual orientation or perceived gender. The rise in these hate crimes is national, as we all know from the several very prominent hate crimes that have been in the news lately, but it's critically important to know in this chamber that the rise in hate crimes against LGBT people is especially sharp right here in California. We're talking about murders, physical assaults, rapes, violence inflicted simply because the victims are LGBT. One hallmark of hate crimes against LGBTs is that they are inflicted to cause great bodily harm. In fact, in California, 100% of the hate crimes against transgender people have involved serious injury or death. Is there a connection between the rise in hate crimes and the level of misinformation, innuendo, and incivility? Many experts think so, and as the members of the LGBT caucus of this assembly warned on May 26, when a government singles out one group to treat them as less than equal, who's next? In speaking of such things today, my intention is not to change minds about this law or that ballot measure. It's simply to stand here with my fellow LGBT honorees to put a face on the laws and the policies that you debate, and perhaps to give you a tiny glimpse into our California lives. Because in spite of the challenges that LGBT people face every day, we are inspired by the examples of other Californians who have blazed a path of equality and acceptance. And in spite of the setbacks, we will never cease in this effort because there is no such thing as being almost equal. For no matter what obstacles may come our way, we will work toward the day when all people in California are treated as fully equal human beings in the eyes of the law. That's a vision that every Californian can aspire to, along with LGBT people in every corner of the state, of every color and stripe, every race and ethnicity, every religion and faith. As a one-time New Jersey girl, now a California girl, that is my California dream, and I thank you for the opportunity to share it with you today. Thank you.
Members, once again, on behalf of the LGBT Legislative Caucus, I thank our guest chaplain, our honorees, and the members of this body for their participation in today's awards. Let's give them one more round of applause. And if the honorees could come forwards, we'll do one final photo of everyone here in the chamber. And I'd like members to know that immediately after the ceremony, there will be a welcoming reception in the Willie Brown conference room for our honorees, should you wish to personally greet and congratulate them. And this concludes our ceremony. We now return back to business on the daily file. We return to motions and resolutions. Mr. Torrico.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I request unanimous consent to re-refer SB 772 from the Business and Professions Committee to the Environmental, Safety and Toxic Materials Committee, and then back to Business and Professions.
Without objection. Also, members, I'd like to direct your attention to the rear chambers and also in the gallery. We have 19 members of the California National Guard who have been with us this morning. We're very fortunate to have them join us today. They're members of the California National Guard's 40th Agribusiness Development Team, or ADT, composed of 64 Army National Guard soldiers from throughout California with a broad spectrum of military and agribusiness training. Soldiers from the 40th ADT will be deployed to the Kunar province of Afghanistan in August. Their mission is to promote the revitalization of agriculture in this region. Members, please join me in welcoming these brave Californians and wish them well. Mr. Hall, for what purpose?
Yes, thank you. Madam Speaker, thank you. I just want to make mention that I met the sergeant of the ADT team on the plane, and she made mention that this will be the first delegation to fly over for the agribusiness development team in the state of California. And I thought it was appropriate that before they go to Afghanistan, that the California State Assembly shows some love for our soldiers as they go and deal with the agricultural business of Afghanistan. Again, let's give them another welcome and wish them well. Thank you.
I'd like to announce our session schedule. We still have some business to take care of, but we do want to give all members a chance to return to their desks. Tomorrow, Tuesday, June 23rd, check-in session and floor session upon call of the Speaker. Wednesday, June 24th, check-in session and floor session upon call of the Speaker. On Thursday, June 25th, we will have floor session at 9:30. On Friday, June 26th, there is no floor session and no check-in session. Members, we'll go on now to Senate second reading file. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 317 with amendments, 419, 215 with amendments, 315, 512, and Senate Bill 183 with amendments.
We also have some Senate files that are eligible to take up today, beginning with file item 7, to be presented by Mr. Tran. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1164 by Assemblymember Tran, an act relating to the maintenance of the codes.
Mr. Tran, you may open.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. AB 1164 is up for concurrence of Senate amendments. This measure is the annual maintenance of the code bill. Amendments adopted in the Senate were technical in nature. All changes included in this measure are non-controversial code maintenance changes. I ask for your aye vote on this concurrence. Thank you.
Seeing no debate or discussion, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 57, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. I've been asked by Mr. Adams to encourage members to welcome his grandmother, Myrtle Houseman, who is with him on the floor today. Welcome to the floor. We move on now to file item 8. Mr. Perez, AJR number 9. Clerk will read.
Assembly Joint Resolution 9 by Assemblymember John A. Perez and others relative to Ryan White HIV/AIDS Treatment Modernization Act of 2006.
You may open, Mr. Perez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is back on concurrence. AJR 9 urges Congress and the President of the United States to enact legislation extending the Ryan White HIV/AIDS Treatment Modernization Act of 2006, including the existing formula-based funding for states like California with maturing name-based HIV reporting systems for 3 years until September 30th, 2012. Passage of this would maximize the amount of federal monies available here to us in the state of California. The amendments that were taken up in the Senate basically make changes and correct the listing of the name of the State Department of Public Health and add co-authors. I respectfully ask for your aye vote. This bill has received broad bipartisan support.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Seeing no further debate or discussion, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 66, ayes 67, no 0. The resolution is adopted. We move to reconsideration. File item 9 will be continued. Members, we're now ready to move into File item 10, reconsideration, is continued. File items, we're now into third reading. File items 11, 12, 13, 14 are pass and retain. File item 15 has been dispensed with. Mr. Calderon, you are prepared to take up file item 16, AB 761. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 761 by Assemblymember Charles Calderon, an act relating to mobile homes.
You may open, Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker and members. This is a measure that will provide for mobile homes what is the law for every other rental unit in the state. If you rent an apartment, a duplex, anything involving a landlord, and you are in a rent control district, there is vacancy decontrol. And that's what this does. It provides that all rent control ordinances must have vacancy decontrol. Now, what does that mean? What that means is if you have a rent control ordinance and you have a tenant and the tenant leaves, then the owner of the mobile home park can raise rents to market rates. Up until then, there is an artificial lid on what the rates can be for rent, controlled by whatever the mobile home rent control measure is in the particular city. So this only deals with whether or not there is vacancy control or vacancy decontrol, i.e. rents go up whenever there is a vacancy in rent control districts, and it does nothing else. Now, there are 18 cities that already have rent control but have vacancy decontrol, as part of their statute. Now, there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation, so I want to take a second to tell you what this does not do. It does not repeal any existing rent control ordinance in the state, nor does it preclude any local government from reenacting or enacting any new rent control provisions in the future. It does not raise the rent of any current tenant in place, including anyone that would here in this room who lives in a mobile home. It does not prevent local governments from regulating rents for tenants in place, even after a space has been decontrolled. In other words, after there's a vacancy, the rates come up to market rates, then the city can re-regulate and control increases in rent until there's another vacancy. And it does not undo any evictions protections that exist in law today. I want to thank the Housing Committee. They asked me to take several amendments that made the legislation, I think, better. It delayed the enacted and the date of operation to 2011, and it provides a phase-in period from 5 years, what was in the bill, to 7 years. And the bill requires that an appraiser has to come in to determine what market rents are, or in the case of a sale, just what market rents are. So you need an appraiser to determine, independent appraiser to determine what market rates are when there is a vacancy. So I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Nava.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And to the author of this bill, please let me express my apologies in that I rise in opposition to your bill. It couldn't be more clear, and particularly sitting as the chair of Banking and Finance, that California has been devastated, absolutely devastated with this mortgage meltdown. And the thousands upon thousands of people who have either lost their homes and been foreclosed upon or will be foreclosed upon. And the trauma that ripples through a community when those notices of default are served in neighborhoods, house after house after house. Why do I raise this now? Because we have a housing crisis. There are too few places for people of moderate and modest means to live in the state of California. Those of you who often speak out in support of local control, talk to the League of California Cities. The League of California Cities, representing electeds throughout the other hundreds of cities in California, states that AB 761 interferes with locally adopted solutions. With one act, this bill sets aside local regulations that have been developed over decades to address issues within the community and balance the affordability of pad rentals with the overall profitability of the park itself. So your local electeds in your district don't like this bill. Those of you that have experience in financial markets and lending, the Bay Federal Credit Union argues that if AB 761 is enacted, it will, quote, be applied statewide, and it will devastate our industry's mobile home mortgage portfolios, very likely making it impossible for our industry to continue to offer affordable mobile home mortgages in California. That is not the result that we want with this bill. We don't want to make life more difficult for Californians. We want to try to create opportunities for Californians. And in many of the communities where you live, these mobile home parks and the rent control protection afforded to your residents, your voters, is all that stands between them and the street. All that stands between them and the street. I respectfully request a no vote.
Mr. Logue.
I want to commend Mr. Calderon. This is an excellent, excellent bill, and it's tremendously a great bill for affordable housing in California. As a county supervisor, I just want to touch bases on the result of not having this bill in place. We had shut down a low-income, affordable mobile home park because the owner could not create enough revenue from the rent in order to fix it up. So instead of making it better for affordable housing, what it did is it eliminated 250 homes in which people had to be relocated because there wasn't enough funds to be able to improve the site. So I think that this is an excellent bill. It will, the more parks that are built, the more competition there will be for those residences, and it'll drive the prices down. It'll have just the opposite effect. So I think that it's a great bill. It will be a great step towards affordable housing, and I think it makes a lot of common sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Logue. Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With the greatest respect of my colleague, Assemblymember Calderon, I must rise today in opposition of AB 761. I believe AB 761 destroys the value of mobile homeowners. If the state changes the mobile home rent control rules, it will destroy the life savings of more than 100,000 homeowners who are counting on the sale of their homes for future needs. AB 761 takes away local government control. More than 100 localities have adopted mobile home rent control ordinances in response to their own local needs. There are many types of ordinances. The state must be stopped from dictating one rule to all the local governments. AB 761 presumes that mobile homes are mobile. Well, I think that that's wrong. Actually, only 3% of mobile home owners or dwellers move. Homeowners must sell their homes in place. If the park owner again can raise the rent significantly, it greatly reduces the selling price of the unit itself. Some owners have even had to abandon their homes as a result of huge rent increases that drove away purchasers. And as a member who represents Santa Monica that had very strict rent control laws, after 10 years of vacancy decontrol for apartments, more than 50% of units that were once affordable to low, moderate, and medium income people are no longer able and have access to affordable housing. And for those reasons, I respectfully ask for a no vote.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Mr. Fuhr.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, picture for a moment that this bill was not about mobile homes and instead about the other housing stock in your neighborhoods. Imagine going back to your districts and explaining to homeowners up and down streets in your districts why you voted for a bill that will devalue the market, the value of their homes, a bill that would constrict the mortgage market, and a bill that would impede the cities in which they live from deciding for themselves what is the most sensible rule to promote affordable housing in those neighborhoods. Devalue your houses, constrict the mortgage market, and eviscerate local control. I can't imagine that anyone here could go back to their districts in this particular economic climate, as Mr. Nava so well portrayed it, and be able to sell that vote. In fact, to the contrary, you go back to your district and you would be trying to explain your vote to constituents who would not be able to believe it. Well, here we are with this bill. Well, why should mobile homes be treated differently for the purpose that I just described than homes the traditional homes? Well, the argument raised, the most important arguments, I guess, are two. One argument I've heard repeatedly is you can't rely on local control here because of the tyranny of the majority, that there are too many renters versus owners such that the owners would ever get a fair shake. Well, when have the proponents of local control ever succumbed to that argument? We're talking about letting democracy work. And indeed, it does work on this state. There are 100 jurisdictions that have rent control rules that pertain to mobile homes and hundreds that don't. Clearly, local jurisdictions are able to distinguish when a situation is good for them and when it's not. And you don't need to rely on any political advocate on this floor to be able to support the argument that this bill will have a very detrimental impact on the mortgage market. All you need to do is listen to the lenders who oppose the bill, because they say the bill is going to create one of two outcomes. Either they won't be lending at all, or they'll be lending at much higher interest rates. That's what they say will happen here. And listen to the owners of these homes themselves. As Ms. Brownlee stated, this bill devalues their homes at precisely the moment when they might want to draw on the equity of those homes to subsist day to day. All of us who have spoken have stated our great respect for the author of the bill. But the policy embedded in this bill is going to have a tremendously devastating impact on a universe of homeowners in our state whom we should be duty-bound to protect at all times, but particularly at this time. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'm going to speak to this issue as someone that's somewhat familiar with some of rent control in different cities. My colleague who just spoke so eloquently as it relates to the city of Los Angeles, and my other colleague that spoke who is from Santa Monica, they're adjoining cities, and yet they have different rent control regulations. But in the city of Santa Monica, my understanding is specifically that when an individual moves out of their apartment, which is rent controlled, that goes to a free market rate and is permitted to. And that's what this bill is trying to do, is allow the free market and the present market rate to be activated once the individual moves on, whether they move out of the state, they move to another city or county. But when that apartment or that mobile home is freed up, that the marketplace is the best place for the rent and the owner to, and the potential future renter to reach an agreement. I urge an aye vote.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and fellow members. I had a real problem with this when it was brought through committee, and the reason being is that I am a strong local control advocate. Quite honestly, I don't see why we have a Department of Housing and Community Development in the state of California, because it should be local control. That being said, I was forced to do a lot of work on this bill to find out what it did and did not do, because I support my local people and I support my cities. And it is their right to institute their codes and their land use. That is their jurisdiction, is land use. So the state really has no business here at all. But that being said, we do have a department, and we are dealing with property rights issue here and a local control issue all at once. The first thing I would like to say is I came from a city that was not, while not under rent control, did actually close a park. And because of rent control, and because of what's happened in parks and how long it takes to do anything with them, quite honestly, our people in our city were left with nowhere to move except Hemet. And that's from Dana Point to Hemet. We had people moving to Apple Valley and to Hemet. And it was a catastrophe. And the reason that it was so is because no one wants to invest in mobile home parks. So I had to do some serious research. On this bill, I think that Mr. Calderon overstates the amount of the amount that the property can appreciate. It's the lesser of two areas. It's either 100% of the existing rate over the next 7 years, and that doesn't begin until 2011. So if anyone has their house on the market right now to be sold, it does not take effect, does not affect that property. If somebody buys it before 2011, it is still under the local rent control. Then the second part is the lesser of the market value or 100% of the rent. I know in one of my units in our areas in Oceanside, they have a rent of $350 a month. Now, mind you, if this can maximally increase to 100%, that would be over the next 7 years could possibly go to $700 and then fall under local rent control again. That's a heck of a deal for anybody. So I was torn with this because their option, if we don't do something, we will lose all of our available mobile home parks, because the option is the parks close, of which I have one in Oceanside that is closing, 54 units, and it's turning to vacant land. The mortgages on those coaches will be due at the time of closure. We also had that experience in Dana Point, where the people couldn't move their mobile home. They had mortgages about $200,000 on these units, and the mortgages were still due and payable with nowhere to go, because the lenders had actually made loans against leased property, or actually not even leased, but month-to-month rental property. Now that's a lender's issue. If you don't ever make your loan longer than the lease. And if you're on a month-to-month lease in a mobile home park, why a lender would loan against the land, I have no idea. But they put my people in Dana Point in a terrible position, because once that park closed, they were still obligated for that mortgage. So there was really no value to them anymore in what they owned, and they still owned the mortgage. They did not get relief, and they had nowhere to live. So I had to come down in support of this simply because I believe in the long term it will help people to have more affordable housing and options when the landowner at some point decides to sell the land. And so I supported this, and I really do believe that the state should get out of housing. These are and land use. This is a local control issue. But that being said, this also speaks to property rights and and really, in fairness, to the mobile home owners, that they get some protection under the law. Thank you.
Mr. Amiano.
Yes, thank you very much. It's always distressing to urge a no vote when such a respected and experienced colleague as Mr. Calderon is the sponsor. However, I feel that the statewide application of this will be devastating to many, many hard-fought tenant protections, particularly, of course, in San Francisco, where the laws are complex and really do try to be fair. However, the history of championing rent control can't just be set aside. I strongly urge a no vote on this issue. Thank you.
Ms. Salas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of this bill, and I'll tell you why. The city of Chula Vista is one of those cities in the state of California that does have full vacancy decontrol. That's one of the cities that I represent in my area of San Diego County. The surrounding communities have no rent control whatsoever. And I just want to clarify something. Much of the argument has been made that if you impose this on a city, that what will happen is the value of the coaches will decline. Well, in seeing the price of mobile homes in my community, it hasn't made one bit of difference whether or not there's been full vacancy control or no rent control at all. It hasn't made a difference in the sale of the coaches. Here's what does make a difference in the sale is the desirability of the mobile home park that you're living in. That does make a difference. So if you have a situation where a mobile home park owner is having these spaces artificially depressed in the market, they are not going to be able to reinvest in the park. And we have had more complaints about substandard mobile home parks than we have about the inability of a coach's price to rise or fall. One of the speakers said that there was only a 3% turnover in the sale of mobile homes. And I think that that's another reason that you shouldn't be afraid of this vacancy decontrol, because usually mobile home park residents buy that coach for a lifetime investment, and they're going to live there until they die. They don't purchase those homes to make a huge profit. And I think that that's been the problem with our real estate market
on the whole, whether it be homes or not. Those people that were buying homes for the purpose that it was all about the dollars and getting money out and not making the emotional investments in their homes, that a home is your castle and that's what you live in. That's where I'm falling down on this. And it's my practical experience of what's happened in my own community, seeing what's happened in the communities surrounding it that don't have vacancy control and don't have rent control, and understanding that this has been in effect in the city and it has made no difference as to the value of the home. What makes a difference in the value of the coach is how well maintained that park is. And I think that that's what we should strive for, is that anyone living in a mobile home park should expect of the mobile home park owner to keep the park up with the good standards and infrastructure that park needs. And it's not going to happen when you artificially depress the spaces. And that's why I'm supporting this bill.
Seeing no further debate or discussion, Mr. Calderon, you may close.
Well, Madam Speaker and members, I really want to thank you for the spirited debate. I think it's heartfelt. And I think that we need to examine the facts and make a decision as to whether or not we can support this bill. Now, a democracy requires that it be a shield and not a sword. But let me tell you how many of these rent control ordinances were enacted in local jurisdictions. Somebody, and I'm exaggerating a little to make the point, but you'll see that it's not so far off. Someone talked to other mobile home owners and said, hey, do you want to lower your rent and keep it from going up? All we got to do is get 400 people. Let's march into a city council, and if we do it enough times, they'll yield, and we can have rent control. And that is in fact what has happened, not only at the local level, but also in the committee room. And there were a lot of statements that were being made, I think, by many people who were simply believed what they were saying, but simply misinformed. Well, if it doesn't sound right that people can get together, pass a law, and take away the value of your property, if that doesn't sound right, you're correct. Because a federal district court in the Northern District, in MHC Financing versus City of San Rafael LTD, MHC Financing LTD versus City of San Rafael, threw out the San Rafael ordinance, saying that to not have vacancy decontrol is unconstitutional and a taking. So you don't have to take my word for it. You can simply go to that case, and I'll give you the site, and you'll see that a federal district court thinks this is unconstitutional. Now, if you listen to some of the arguments that are being made in opposition to the bill, and I really welcome and appreciate my colleagues' showing of support by demonstrating their respect. But I do appreciate it. But if you take a look at what the arguments are, you know, Mr. Nava, or one member, pointed out that the only thing standing in the way between the streets and a home is rent control. Well, first of all, let's examine what this bill does. This bill doesn't affect any existing tenant. Any tenant that lives in a mobile home park today stays there under the rent control ordinance. If they move and a new tenant comes in, well, then it goes up to market rates if you have vacancy decontrol, and then the rates get regulated from there on out until there's another vacancy. But let me tell you what happens in rent control districts. because you heard from Mr. Fuhr reference the financing and, you know, the mobile home mortgage market. And by the way, there's only one credit union that's really in opposition to this. But if you look at that argument, what are they really saying? What they're saying is you're going to devalue the mobile home value if you vote for this bill. Well, in rent-controlled districts, the value goes up. There's an artificial value that goes up. Why? Because anybody wanting to buy my mobile home is told, well, you're paying a lot for the mobile home, but your rent's going to stay low forever, so you make it up over the long term. Now, if you're a property owner and you want to get some value for your property, and there's a rent-controlled, and you decide to start a mobile home park and there's a rent control measure, and you lose the value of their property, that's not right. And that's why a federal district court has ruled as such. And let me tell you, this is the law for every other rental unit in the state.
10 seconds, Mr. Carter.
In all due respect to Ms. Bromley, I voted for vacancy decontrol because of the numbers done in a study which showed that the number of minorities was very small in Santa Monica. So that's what ultimately persuaded me. Anyway, I could go on and on, but
Please conclude, Mr. Calderon.
Yes.
Your time has expired.
This is a matter of fairness. Democracy should be a shield and not a sword. And if you own property, you ought to be able to get the value out of your property without it being taken away through the democratic process. I ask for an aye vote.
All discussion having ended, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Mr. Calderon? Mr. Calderon moves a call. Members, file item 17 is pass and retain. Senate third reading file items 18 through 46 are pass and retain. File item 47 is pass and retain. The remaining of the Senate third reading file will also be pass and retain. We move on to the consent calendar. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 823 by the Committee on Revenue and Taxation and Act relating to taxation.
This is the consent file. Members, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Aye 62, noes, aye 63, no 0. Measure passes.
Senate Bill 121.
Aye 63, no 0.
And Senate Bill 490.
Aye 63, no 0. All right, members, we will recess the regular session now for purpose of convening the third extraordinary session. And without objection, we will substitute the prayer, pledge, other opening procedures in the regular session for third extraordinary session. We move on to Mr. Emerson. We'll recognize Mr. Krikorian. We'll go on to motions and resolutions. Mr. Krikorian.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to withdraw Assembly Bills 37 through 46 from the desk, to take the measures up without reference to file, to have the bills read a second time, and to order the bills to the third reading file for Tuesday, June 23rd. These measures relate to the budget.
This motion requires a second. Mr. Gaines, are you objecting?
Yes.
Are you seconding?
Well, I have an objection, or actually just a clarification with our members that we are going to abstain on this issue.
Very well.
Thank you.
We still need a second. Mr. Fuhr seconds the motion. This is not debatable. Mr. Gaines, you're not objecting to the motion to suspend the rules to take these actions. You're simply asking your members to abstain.
You want a roll call? You can't abstain without a voice vote.
We are doing this on a voice vote, however. You're requesting a roll call vote, and then your members shall abstain. Very well. Thank you. So Mr. Krikorian moves, and Mr. Fuhr has seconded that we take these actions. And it will take place with a roll call vote. So clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Krikorian is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Gaines is asking for abstention. Mr. Krikorian is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Gaines has asked for his members to abstain. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Ayes 41, noes 0.
Rules are suspended.
The rules are suspended. Okay, clerk will read AB 37 through 46 for a second time.
Assembly Bill 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 45, and Assembly Bill 46.
The bills are deemed read, and they will be ordered to the third reading file. They will be eligible to take up at our next floor session. Members, that concludes our third extraordinary session business, so we will now recess third extraordinary session upon call of the Speaker. We return to our regular session. Members, we still have a few matters of business to take care of.